Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming to Mom Talk today. We are here tonight with Jane Jackson, and she is the founder of Bristol Grandparent Support Group, and she is located in Bristol in England, right? Is that correct?
Yeah, it is.
Yes. So we are coming to you tonight to talk about the importance of extended family and grandparents in a child's life. So with that, I want to, Jane, I'd kind of like to get you started on, if you don't mind, telling us a little bit about your story and what kind of brought you to this.
Okay, that's fine. So in 2007, we lost contact with our granddaughter after my son's separation and consequent divorce after that. She was 7. And up until then, we'd had a really good relationship with her. We'd had a close relationship. She lived on the other side of the country, but she would come and stay here for holidays, and everything was okay until Easter, actually, in 2007. So Easter is quite a poignant time for all of us, really. She was sitting in the back of our car and she said, "I've been told to dump my family in Bristol." Bearing in mind she was only 7. And we didn't respond at all. And in fact, she was right. When she went home that day, we didn't see her for 11 and a half years. And equally, my son didn't see his daughter for 11 and a half years either. And so I'd never heard of this happening before, ever. I've never come across it. And we were devastated. Of course we were. And I did research, as you do when these things happen, to try and find out a little bit about it, if I could find out if there was a support group or something that I could join near me. There was very little that I could find. The only thing I could find, that there was an estimation of there being 1 million children in the UK denied contact with their grandparents. And I did what all grandparents do when this happens, I think, and began to sink very low, and decided one morning, actually, I could sink or swim with this. And so the thing for me to do was to try and set up my own support group, and I did. And I advertised in our local press, explained what I was doing. I had a headline that said "tea and cake for the grandchildren." I now know that if you put cake in anything, you get a response. So I use that quite a lot. And I invited any grandparents that were going through the same thing as I was to come to my house on a certain date. And I was astonished that 6 grandparents appeared on my doorstep, people I'd never met in my life. And that was the beginning of Bristol Grandparent Support Group. And I've been contacted by over 7,500 grandparents since then. So we now have groups across the UK. I encourage grandparents to set up their own groups in their own areas to do the same thing that we do, really.
Yeah, because then they can get that face-to-face and really, be in the same room and,
Definitely.
just kind of talk through things and support each other. I think that's
it's the
brilliant.
Empathy. If you go into any situation like that and you know that everybody in that room absolutely gets what you're talking about because it's happened to them, they understand. There's an instant bond, and it's been a huge privilege for me to witness the friendships that have occurred over the period of time with grandparents, which is great.
Yeah. Gives you a way to form new friendships too, and that's always a good thing to help just expand your group supports and stuff like that. You have someone to turn to, and other people have you to turn to. And we're all at different levels. We've been talking about this a lot lately, where we're all at different levels, and some people are okay while some people need support, and then it often alters.
Yeah,
where they're okay and now you need support. So it's always good to have that support group and network.
Yeah, and when grandparents first contact me, some of them, of course, are looking for an answer.
Of course.
And they will always say how isolated and alone they feel. And the point of us really is to say, well, actually, you're not alone anymore, and you're not isolated anymore. And that you can contact us whenever you want to, which they do on a regular a regular time. It doesn't really matter what time it is, but they will contact us quite regularly. So yeah, it's been a rich learning curve, certainly.
Exactly. And does the coronavirus and the situation now make that even more difficult? How
Yeah.
are you managing to work through that?
Yeah, it's highlighting it, particularly for a grandparent who lives on their own,
Mm,
because of course they're now in lockdown.
very
They
isolated.
can go out for their hour's walk or whatever they want to do, but they can't leave their homes. Some are shielded for actually 3 months, which means they have to stay within their home for that, and that's awful, because they have no one to talk to, and so that's when they pick the phone up, or they email, or they Skype. They all do what they feel comfortable doing, and interestingly, of course, what's also happened is I'm now being contacted by grandparents who aren't estranged as we would understand it, but actually at the moment they're not seeing their grandchildren.
Right.
And so that's taken on a whole, and I wasn't expecting that. That happened completely out of the blue, really. So
Mm-hmm.
I realise now that actually, we have all grandparents. There's no section of grandparents. It's all grandparents who are not seeing their grandchildren. And of course, they can use modern technology. They can FaceTime, etc.
Mm-hmm.
All the social media platforms they can use. But there are also many grandparents who don't use technology at all.
Right. Right.
And so they need to think of ways that they can keep connected to their grandchildren, but in a obviously not in a technological way. And so
Yeah.
I'm trying to come up with various ideas that will help them. So it's interesting how it's suddenly moved on to something else, really. But my hope, of course, is that now all grandparents will understand a little bit about what it actually is like to be estranged and alienated from
Mm-hmm.
grandchildren, totally.
You
So
know,
I'm hoping they'll learn from it, actually.
yeah. And I don't know how easy it is to pull silver lining out of COVID, but there is a benefit that grandparents, and I think people have more awareness and more understanding, like you just said, and it's a shame that it took something like this to get us there. But if we get there, that we'll take that. We definitely need to get there, and of course we want everybody to be safe and healthy, and we know that we're all stuck at home. And we're trying to find ways of staying connected and not feeling isolated. So thank goodness there is technology. But you make a very valid point. There's a lot of people, and the age group is actually the hardest one hit, I think, with this whole virus, and the isolation, feeling like you're cut off from things that you normally do.
Yes.
And so I know that must be difficult. So do you know of any ways that are helping the elderly that do not, or the grandparents that do not have technology even in their home? Or have you heard?
Yeah, I mean, what I've done is I've used some of the practical advice that I give grandparents, under normal circumstances, but tweaked it slightly. So, they can keep a box with things that are going on during this period of time, to keep in a box to give their grandchildren when they see them, because they will be seeing them. They can keep a journal. I mean, we are witnessing history in the making. It may be awful history, but we are. And actually to record this history as a personal story is very useful. And I have no doubt the younger generation will want to know what it was like when we were going through all of this. And actually, good old-fashioned letter writing.
Yes, and
it's a skill. Some of us, we've lost the skills sometimes to just sit down and write a letter. And I have 4 grandchildren, actually, and my grandchildren are sending me challenges every week through the post. So my challenges at the moment are various odd drawing requests. So my first one was to draw Captain Underpants. yeah, I thought you might, yeah. And you know, aliens, and and then the last challenge, which was very difficult, was a character called Two-Face, which I had absolutely no idea who that was at all. So I had to look that up myself.
Thank goodness for
But,
Google.
but actually, the joy that that's bringing the grandchildren as well, of receiving a letter, you know, as an answer, and then sitting down and writing a letter as a letter should be written, is amazing. You know, it brings me enormous joy, and I know they like it too. So, you know, grandparents can do all of that. You know, everybody can sit down and write a letter. That's, you know.
Well, and I love the creativity of that. And we've been talking about creativity a lot lately. I just spoke with Mark Hegarty the other day, and the creativity of what he's doing, but also talking about what can you do to help alleviate some of the anxiety or, you know, the stress of being isolated or feeling that way. And, you know, writing, painting.
Yeah.
Another friend of mine plays music that helps to calm, and she's sharing it. So it's helping, you know, it's not just ourselves, it helps others. So like you found this
support is a two-way thing, isn't it? So
yeah,
you know, the person you're supporting is benefiting, but actually you're supporting by doing that as well. So I think we can learn a lot from this, and I hope each and every one of us actually comes out better people.
It's almost like we're getting back to basics.
Yes, it is.
It's simplifying things in life and taking a pause. And, you know, technologies is nice, but it's not who or what we live for. We can't live through technology, but we live on through things that we write, things that we sing. Those are things that can be perpetually shared for, you know, generations to come.
Yeah. And
even
actually,
doing this,
it's about using this time wisely, isn't it? So that when we get to the end of it, not saying, oh gosh, I had all that time, so why didn't I do X, Y, and Z? You know, now we need to actually think, okay, so what are we going to fill our time with? And it has to be creative. And if it can be helping somebody else, then, you know, that's a bonus.
One something that, you know, as I've been studying the brain and how we deal with trauma, a way to release some of the things that our brain tends to hold on to is to use a creative method or a method of delivery. So you're taking the trauma or the feelings from the brain and you're expressing them. And expressing them can be in forms of painting or drawing or writing. And what happens is, you know, you get into these stuck modes, but when you start like handwriting, for example, your brain is actually sending signals all the way down to your hand, and as it's writing, it's expressing. And that is an important thing. And one of the things that, like you mentioned, it's almost a lost art. We're not doing that as often. So, you know, even painting is becoming digital. So now we're finding ways of being creative and bringing some of that value back.
Yes, we are.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you, I pulled up your website. I've seen it before because, you know, we've kind of talked back and forth for like the last year or so. And it's very easy to navigate, first of all. So it's a very nice site. Yeah. But what I like about it is, you know, some of the first things, let me go back to the homepage. You know exactly what it's for when you get here. And then you have three simple things. You have your story, your rights, and the blog. And it's interesting, you know, you shared with us your story a little bit, and it's right there. And then the first thing you say is, welcome to Grandchildren's Rights. One voice, united, breaking the silence. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, I can. It was very important to me, really. I think I learned very early on that when I set this up, that I wanted it to be not about the rights of grandparents. Of course, I absolutely understand the devastation because I was one of them. I understand that. But for us, it's always been about the rights of the grandchildren to have a continuing relationship with all of their extended family after a family breakdown. It's incredibly important. Being a grandparent is an utter privilege. Anybody who is a grandparent who is watching will know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
And until you're a grandparent, you don't get that, actually. But actually, when you hold that little baby who is your own child's child, which is surreal in itself, actually you fall in love all over again.
I imagine.
And it's just the most magical thing. And so that I can still remember with my eldest granddaughter, because she is the one we were estranged from. I can remember holding her and her looking up at me full of expectation, and she was, I don't know, 2 days old, 2 or 3 days old, and yet, you know, these big blue eyes were staring at me, and I just thought, my goodness me, what a responsibility is this to be a grandparent. I'm not sure I know how to do it.
Oh no.
Because actually, you know, you don't know how to be a parent, do you? You
Right.
learn on the job. Well, actually, you learn on the job as a grandparent as well. But when it goes wrong, you will probably have heard it called a living bereavement, and that is precisely how it feels. It does feel like a living bereavement. But
Mm-hmm.
there had been organisations in the past who had fought, for want of a better word, for grandparents' rights, and it, for me, it didn't. I didn't feel comfortable with that. I always worked with children, and so have always come from where the children are. That's you know, my thing, really. And so I felt that, you know, as a grandparent, you're an adult, and so yes, it's dreadful and devastating, but actually the children have no say in this.
Mm-hmm.
They are put into an utterly impossible situation. Children are being made to make decisions that no child should actually have to make.
Right.
And for me, denying that relationship between a grandchild and a grandparent is emotional abuse.
Right.
And actually, it's becoming, for me, a child protection issue. And I think that's the way we need to be moving forward with it, because I know how damaging it is to these children when this happens, because I've seen it for myself. Because what I haven't said is that 2 years ago, our granddaughter decided to contact us again. And so we are reunited with her now, and she is back in our lives. So I can say, in all honesty, the damage that is done is enormous, and it's a lifelong damage. These children have no self-esteem, no self-worth. They have lost trust in the adults around them because they have discovered that the parent that they've been living with has lied to them, has painted grandparents as monsters, as being horrible people, and all sorts of terrible stories that can go along that line. And actually, they suddenly find out that's not right. It's not true.
Right.
There's no winners in this scenario.
Absolutely.
You know, in estrangement and alienation, be it parents, you know, whoever you are, nobody wins. Nobody. But we are still working towards rebuilding trust with our granddaughter, and it's a very slow and a very sensitive process.
Well, I think it's wonderful that you have reunited with her and you have this opportunity, because as somebody that has been erased from one of my parents, I learned that the only way well, at first, let me back up a little bit, because you don't realize that you need to heal first. First of all, that's the first thing. You don't think there's anything wrong. You think what you have gone through is normal. Then when you start realizing that wasn't so normal, then you have to process that and work through all that. And then you have to get to a spot where you can, you know, try and trust again, because you're right, there's a trust issue that's brought into that. Once you start working through that, the next step is to reach out to the adults in your life so that you can heal 100%, because without them, you can't, because that's where your answers come from. That's where your curiosities are solved. You know, every child has that. Every child that is kept away from another parent has a deep-seated curiosity that they can't get rid of. They can suppress it, they can deny it, but it's still there. And they'll either have to continue with that suppression, or they're going to have to start looking for the answers.
Yes.
When they get to the point of looking for the answers, they can't get them without you. So, for children that are out there today, for, grandparents and parents that are wondering what happens, they come back so that they can feed that curiosity. And what you're doing now with your granddaughter, it's I want to say that it is a lot of work, but there is a chance for her to heal and have that trust and that deep connection with you again.
Yes, and I hope that we're getting there. I mean, we're going in the right direction. And it was quite interesting because her boyfriend was estranged from his father for 16 years, and he almost instigated it, I think. And the first time they came down here, he brought her down because at that time she wasn't driving, and he said, "I've told her she's got to come and find out the truth for herself or she'll never rest."
Exactly.
And you've said exactly the same thing.
Yep, exactly. Every one of us has that. And
Yeah.
I haven't met one person yet that doesn't have that.
Mm.
And I commend him because he's doing exactly what, more or less what I'm doing, is I'm trying to help others find that path as well.
Sure.
And
Sure.
for him to tell her what she really kind of needed to hear, and coming from him probably made that transition for her easier. So it's a wonderful
Yes,
thing.
I'm sure it did. I mean, it's interesting, I mean, we'll never know whether she would have done it had he not been there to give her gentle support. I don't know, but I'm eternally grateful, that's for sure.
Well, the fact that she did do it means that she would have maybe, but maybe not as soon. Maybe it would have taken a lot longer. So he definitely helped.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So you meet with grandparents at your home. Well,
Yep.
in general, not right now.
Usually.
But what has your group grown into? Because I know you've spread out and you have different groups. So I kind of want to know about how that happened too, and how do you support those external groups? But your little group has become pretty tight.
Yep, it has. Okay, so when I had my first meeting, I had no idea in what direction it was going to go in. I didn't know whether it would work or anything. And so I basically just stood there, a bit like an idiot, really, and just told them what had happened to me. And then when I finished, I waited to see what would happen. And the response was extraordinary. And there were tears. And there was almost a palpable sense, a sighing of relief. Even though I've been doing this for nearly 12 years now, from the first meeting I ever had until the last one before we had to obviously stop because of the situation, that sense of relief is there at every meeting, because I have new people will come to every meeting. I never know how many people are coming. So that's quite an interesting experience in itself. My house isn't that big, but we manage. And so what I realized, well, here I am talking to you, many miles away, and it became very clear very quickly that there were grandparents actually globally who needed support and help, and how on earth could I reach out to all of these people? And so it was always one of the aims of the organization to try and give grandparents confidence to be able to set up groups in their own areas. So obviously then you can have more people being supported. And we decided that because there was a call for there to be a national organization, and although there is some sense in that, there are minuses for it as well, and I'll explain that in a minute. But with our grandparents who decide to set up groups themselves, Mark, my husband, and I will go and visit them if they want us to. We'll go to their first meeting just to give them a bit of a hand, or they're quite happy to carry on doing it the way they want to do it. Every group is run independently, and so how they run their groups is entirely up to them. But they know that I'm at the end of the phone, so they can ring me and ask for some advice, or I'll help them in any way I can. I give them all the resources that I used to help me set up the group and all that sort of thing. But a group can be 2 people.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't have to be masses of people. And so it could just be, as it happens, I have my meetings in my own home. Not everybody is comfortable doing that for obvious reasons, actually. And so some people will go to their local cafe, and so they'll meet a group of people within that sort of environment. Others will hire a small hall, church hall or local community hall, and do it that way. And so there are lots of different ways all over the country that people are actually doing this, but it is entirely up to them. They're not beholden to us in any way at all. And that was actually quite important for us, that the independence of it, really.
Yeah.
And to go back to the idea of a national organisation, the problem with a national organisation is, if you consider, I've been contacted, as I say, by over 7,500 grandparents. Clearly, they don't all come to my meeting, I should add. But once an organisation gets too big, you then have to employ staff. You have to have all sorts of stuff that we obviously don't have in the way we run it, because we are a small charity and that's how we run it. But if the organisation gets too big, you lose the ethos of what our support group started with, mm-hmm. which is about the empathy. And it's about, when you phone a helpline, 100% know that the person answering that phone is an estranged and alienated grandparent. And for me, I think that's really important.
Yeah.
Because when an organisation gets enormous, if you've got loads of different salaried staff that you have answering those helplines, chances are the majority of those people answering those helplines have no experience of it.
Or a stake in it.
Yeah. And so that loses that personal connection that is instant. When somebody rings and says, have you been estranged from your grandchild, or are you estranged from your grandchild? And I and all the other group leaders can say yes. There's an immediate connection there. Yeah. And that, for me, makes a big difference.
There's something to be said about what we call here as grassroots organizations,
sure.
where it really does have that empathy component to it, rather than feeling like it's another organization that's ran by bigger entities instead of by the people.
Yeah.
And the people is where the compassion comes from.
Yes, and for us, the magic word in our title is support, and that that's what we do. We give support, and we give support because we understand. We know what grandparents are going through. We know how terrible they are feeling. So they don't even actually have to explain it, because we know.
Right. Well, I can see why they would want to have a national, just because they want to cover everybody, but it does lose that element. And so it's like, when would you want to be that, the national or nationwide, or even global? Because if you were to go global, that could be, at some point, that might be really hard to manage. So
precisely.
I think the way that you grouped it out, though, so you have other people that are running it, and they kind of know that you're there for support, and as they extend, and hopefully they become that pay it forward, and then they're the contact. So you're kind of like networking. And
I don't think it needs to have that. It doesn't need to have whatever that huge.
Not the hierarchy.
I don't think it needs it. It's not necessary.
Yeah.
But there are people clearly who disagree with that. But that's okay. That's fine. And actually, the way that the internet works now, You don't need that, because you go global without even trying. It happens.
Exactly.
And we have, I have a Facebook page, and I also have a private page for grandparents as well, and they are from all over the world. And that was set up really to enable grandparents to be able to connect who were too far away. They weren't near a group, or they were in another country. And so that works very well as well.
Yeah. Well, and you do have a lot of presence on the internet, and we'll be sure to post those links in the chat so that people can contact you. Because, like you said, if you have access to the internet, it doesn't matter if you're in England or the States or Australia or anywhere. You can support each other. You may not be able to be face to face, so you might not be in the presence of the smaller groups, but you can still support, and that networking, I think, is a lot of support.
Yes, and
a
I
lot
think
of ideas
so
come.
too. I think so too. And I think, I know that when I set Bristol Grandparent Support Group up, that was also my therapy.
Oh, absolutely.
It most definitely was. I didn't know it was at the time, but what it did, of course, it stopped me focusing on what was happening to us, because I was thinking about other people and talking to other people all the time. And so that took that horrible burden, really. I think it took it away slightly.
The
And
sense
also,
of feeling
and
like
of course,
you were
my granddaughter, of course, knew what we were doing as well, because she'd seen it. So she was acutely aware of what was going on as well. So, that was, at the time, I don't think I knew that that's why I was doing it. But, I had a blog that I wrote for her under her name, actually, and she found that as well. Because working with children, I know that if you're doing an IT lesson, the first thing they do is they type their name in and see if anything comes up. And of course, she did, and it did.
just about anything that's out there, you can't hide it from the kids. And I think that's a big thing to mention, that if you want to reach your grandchildren or even your children, having a place out there to have some positive memories or comments, things for them to find, or just even if they're just looking, they'll remember those things. And and I think it's really important to remove that negative side of it, because that also is something that they'll see. And
I absolutely agree. And in the 12 years that have passed, not once have I ever said anything derogatory about her parent, and I never will. And if people do that, they're very foolish.
Yeah,
that isn't what your children and grandchildren want to read.
No, and they love that person. So
yeah, they do.
When you're talking negative about them, then it's just doing the same thing in reverse in a lot of cases. So making sure that your child knows about that unconditional love, they're not having to choose between one parent or the other, which would be a condition. So they need to feel comfortable loving both and feel safe loving both. And that
absolutely, which is their complete right to do.
Exactly.
It goes back to the child and the grandchild's rights, and that is the most important thing of all.
Exactly. Exactly. I only had one grandmother, and the rest of, like, when my dad's mother died when he was 14. So even after I found him, I still didn't have I wouldn't have had the opportunity to ever meet her, because she died before I was actually born. So he never met his father. And then my mom, her mother, my grandmother, was there after the age of, I think it was 6, on and off, like summer vacations. But I never had family around. And that's one thing that I think that I truly miss, is having that close extended family. You say extended, but it's close family. You're talking aunts and uncles and grandparents and cousins. I missed that. And I really hope that this is something that I think children actually do have a right to. They have a right to know who their families are on both sides,
Well, if
regardless.
they don't want anything to do with them, then that's fine. That's their decision, isn't it? But they have to be given that opportunity.
They have to have all of the information, or they can't make that decision, the right decision. It's like that. You have to have the information, or you're not making an educated decision, right? So the same thing applies, really.
Yes. Well, I know when my granddaughter came back into our lives, she was astonished at the fact that she had twin cousins and a half sister, and that was quite something, actually.
Yeah, I can relate to that. And I found out I had brothers and cousins that I lived right like 20 minutes away from. Yeah. It's quite a story when you realize how close you were to family and never knew it.
Yes.
Yeah. So you, on your page, you also talk about whose rights is it, and it's actually what rights do you have to see your grandchildren is one of the first things you mention here. And it's important, I think, because you focus a lot on what is the child's rights, and it is the child's right to the grandparent. And that's actually, I think, a better argument than it being the parent's right or the grandparent's right. Not saying that they don't have them.
No, but there's something horrible. The word rights is wrong, but unfortunately there isn't a word that you can use instead of it, which is why we use it all the time. But certainly, in the UK, you don't have an automatic legal right to see your grandchildren anyway. And I think it's the same in the States as well.
No, I don't think so. I often use the phrase that it's the child's inalienable right or their human right, because it's something that came from something no man could create other than the parent. So no government, no entity, nobody can create that other than the two parents that are involved. So it's the child comes into this world with those two things for sure. They have equal chromosomes from each parent. So it's their inalienable right or their human right. And I think that has a lot more power than trying to fight the other rights and explaining why the Constitution, because then there's loopholes and it gets so messy.
Yes, it does.
It's not clear.
And I absolutely agree. And which is, I go back to you're talking about cultural change, and that's really what we're dealing with. And maybe, who knows, as I said about, after we get over this coronavirus disaster, maybe family will be valued as it should be. I think over the years, politically, and in all sorts of other different ways, I think families have been devalued. And I think we do need to go back to the basics of actually family is really important. And it's incredibly important. It's part of your identity. And you need to know where you've come from and the people who have come before you. It's part of being a human being, is knowing those connections.
I agree 100%. I think that grandparents are, a rite of passage, and for the child deserves to know their grandparent, because there's wisdom there, there's comfort there, there's things that you get from your grandparents, not that you can't get from your parents, but it's
different.
It's an additional connection, and the more love the child receives, the better they are, the more they thrive, the more successful they can be. And that's what we really want for children.
Yes, and I was very fortunate that I have two sons, and they grew up living with their grandmother, my mum, and I know if they were here now that they would just say how amazing it was to have her so close in their lives, and the wisdom and the enormous humor that she brought into their life. there was nothing like it. There is nothing like it. It is a unique relationship.
Yeah, yeah. And it's an individual relationship. Children
Yes.
have, and I think this is something that I think a lot of our leaders or our lawmakers, maybe, I mean, I think the mental health would understand, but it's important that a child has an individual relationship, it's not a group or a, you know, like I love my parents, they have an individual relationship with each one. And they
Yes.
get different things from each one. And same with grandparents, they get different types of love, different things that excite them. It's a totally different relationship. It's
Yes.
individual.
Yes, it's a bit like a security blanket, I always think.
Yeah, good way
It's a
to.
place, it's the place to run to when you need to sometime. And that can be when you're quite grown up too. You know, it doesn't have to be little children. I think grandparents are just enormously important. And you will get there one day.
Yeah, yeah. It could be any day.
It is extraordinary.
Actually, I'm looking forward to it because to me, that's the extended family I'm going to have.
Yes.
I didn't have it, you know, with ancestors, so I'm going to have it.
You take it forward, can't you?
Forward and be the grandparent that they never had.
Yeah.
So I never had.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I do look forward to that, and my kids know that. So
yeah. Oh well, they need to get on with it then.
yeah, right. Got to get out from under this quarantine. Oh my goodness. I want to highlight a little bit about, you talk about what you can do. So you have a lot of suggestions out here. So you start with you can go down the legal route, and then you go on from there. So can you walk us through that a little bit?
If I was looking at my website this moment,
well, I'll help. So the first one is you can go down the legal route, which means try and fight for your rights in court, in the enormity of court costs and time. And
it's something I actually never advise a grandparent to do. That doesn't mean to say I won't support them if that's what they want to do. But people have to go into it with their eyes wide open.
Right.
It's vital they go to a family lawyer, obviously. But they really need to find out what that lawyer thinks. And there are good lawyers out there, and there are lawyers that will say, actually, you know, you haven't seen your grandchild for 5 years, so the likelihood of you being granted a child arrangement order is very remote. I mean, I have grandparents who will ring me who have spent their entire life savings going backwards and forwards to court and still not getting a court order. And actually, even if you are given a court order, the resident parent, more often than not, will not adhere to it. Yeah. And in this country, I don't know about in the US, but in this country, there is rarely a consequence of somebody breaching a child arrangement order.
It's been like that here as well.
Sure. Okay. You know,
whoever has the physical custody or, you know, has the child seems to control when and where the child can go.
And of course, this coronavirus is really coming into play as well over that at the moment, because although the law is stating clearly that children can move freely from one parent to another, the resident parent is digging their toes in and saying, no, you know, because of the virus, they're staying here with me. They're not going anywhere.
It's rampant here too as well.
Yeah, and so that will happen. But I think until, and it's one of the things that the family justice system over here really needs to change, is that if a court order is broken, not just with a grandparent, but with a parent as well, that there's a consequence.
Absolutely.
Because that's the problem. People play the system and they know that they can go on doing this. They can say, you know, if you were supposed to have, you know, your child or grandchild on a Saturday, you know, they'll ring up and they'll say, oh, sorry, they're not very well. that will happen time and time and time again. And clearly it might well be justified every now and again, but not every time. And so the law absolutely needs to change from that angle, because I think all it would take would be for one case, a highlighted case, for there to be a consequence if a child arrangement order is broken. And I think we'd soon see that it wasn't happening. People would stop doing that. So that's my view about going down the legal route. And of course, it's worth me saying at this point too, as I've said to people in the past, because we're a support group, of course, what we don't get grandparents ringing us saying, whoopee-doo, we've been to court and we've been granted a very successful contact order.
Right.
Because the nature of what we do, it's people who are going through a bad time. So, statistically, I don't know. I don't have those statistics. All I know is that the enormous anguish and the emotional stress that is caused by going to court for the majority of grandparents is enormous. And so I will always say to them, really do your homework before you take that step, because you have to apply to the court twice. You have to apply to the court for permission to then apply for a contact order. It's called a child arrangement order here.
Wow.
And that's no guarantee that it will work. And so people need to be very aware of that.
I agree with that 100%. And when I first started learning all of this, I have 2 degrees in criminal justice. So when I hear this, I'm thinking that doesn't make any sense. What is going on? If you violate a court order, you go, you're in contempt of court and you go to jail. Why are we having this discussion? Because the law is the law.
It's something peculiar to the family law system.
Yes.
And then they're always talking about reform here. They do it all the time, but actually very rarely does anything happen. So yes, it's really important that is addressed.
Mm-hmm.
Go on. It's okay.
I was just going to add to that I'm working with the National Parents Organization, where we're trying to change our state statutes, our state laws, to include that rebuttable presumption of equal shared parenting, so that parents are equal and they have the ability to equally make decisions when it comes to the child, so that not one parent has more control over the child. And that means that there should be as close to equal timeshare as possible as well, so that they have to work together. It's a battle. It's an uphill battle, and it's going to take a while for that to get through all the states. We have to do that on a state level. So we have 50 states. So it's a lot to work towards.
Yes.
But I think that the problem is, and in my opinion, and this may not be anybody else's opinion, but it is my opinion, that we've got to remove this kind of stuff from the courtroom. Divorce doesn't need to be resolved in court. What needs to be resolved in court is, real issues that can't be resolved. This stuff needs to be, mediated or something outside of the court.
Definitely.
Yeah, because then if you have an agreement that you've gone through, and maybe you've gone through, we set up counseling or something that each parent has to learn how to co-parent, there could be a list of things that we set up in place. Because I don't know what the infrastructure of this looks like, but if we did do something like that, then they would go through that process rather than the court process. And once they go to the judge for that final decree, the judge says, are you in agreement? And they say yes. Then when you violate it, that's when you go back to court for contempt and that kind of stuff. But until then, we keep it out of the courtroom.
No, I agree. I think you're absolutely right.
Definitely needs some work. So you talk about applying to the court for the permission, which, am I understanding that you have to apply to ask permission to actually bring a case?
That's right. Yes, they call it leave. You apply for leave, but it's just another word for permission. And if that's granted, you then go ahead and apply for a child arrangement order. So you in fact apply twice.
Wow. Wow, we cut out a lot of the nonsense work.
Oh yeah, I agree. I agree.
It just seems
It
like
is nonsense.
just more work. I
Yeah.
like to streamline things. I'm a streamliner
Yeah.
at work, so cut out all of the frill stuff that you don't need and just get focus in and only the steps that to get the job done.
Yeah, indeed.
Direct contact is being allowed to meet with your grandchildren, and so is this what you're going to court for, asking for direct contact, or this?
Yeah, there are different forms of contact. There's direct contact and indirect contact. So direct contact is obviously meeting physically, face to face.
Right, okay.
Indirect contact can be sending letters,
Phone
calls, that sort of thing. So there are different forms that can take.
Okay, that makes sense.
Often what happens here as well is you have to prove that you have a really good relationship with a grandchild. But because the system here is so slow, it can be 6 to 8 months before you even get to court. So a judge will then say, well, actually, you haven't seen your grandchild for 6 or 7 months. So, of course, you haven't got a relationship, you haven't in the last 6 months. So it's not beneficial for the child for you to regain contact. But actually, that's the system's fault. That's not the person's fault.
Exactly. I disagree with that. I will disagree with that. I don't care if it's 10 years that you haven't seen that child. I know, I've been there. I hear judges saying this all the time. I hear lawyers saying this all the time. I'll just wait until they're old enough. They'll come around. Bull.
No, I agree. I agree with you.
Yeah, that might be true. However, that's 10 years of trauma that child has to live through, and they don't even know it. So they know that they're traumatized for something. They can't put their finger on it. They don't understand it. So therefore they can't process it and work through it. So they end up going through what we call here in the States, there's an ACEs study, and it's the childhood traumas that children go through that create their environment. And there's like 10 questions that if a child has gone through and they have so many or more, then they've had that adverse childhood experience. So that says something. That says a lot right there. And so when a judge says arbitrarily, oh, you've already gone for 6 months, what's the big deal?
I agree.
My mind.
I agree. Well, 11 and a half years as well in our case. So yeah, I mean, it's a nonsense.
It is nonsense. And I would ask the judge, did you go without seeing your kids for 6 months or 11 years or 44 years? Do you know what 6 months feels like without your child? There's a difference.
No, of course they don't.
No, of course they don't.
No.
It's for them to say.
No.
Yeah. No. Okay. Better get me off that case.
A raw nerve.
I know. Well, I with the justice side of me, and I work in some forensic elements too, and it's like it can't be this wishy. You can't have everybody has to comply in a criminal court, but family law you can do whatever the heck you want. That does not make sense.
No, and that, I mean, I don't know if you've got this in the States as well, but we have a thing here called wishes and feelings.
Wishes and feelings?
Wishes and feelings for the children.
Okay.
And so they will be asked what their wishes and feelings are. And that will determine whether they see a parent or a grandparent. And that's a huge bone of contention because, of course, in reality, children will say what they've been told to say.
Or what they...
And actually, a young child is a child, and you're asking them to make an adult decision, which they shouldn't have to make. No child should have to make an adult decision like that. They love both their parents, regardless of what's gone on with the relationship. They love their grandparents. So they will know that there are certain things that they should and shouldn't say, because if they say outside what they've been told to say, they know that their resident parent will be upset, possibly cross, and so they choose not to say these things. And so they will, I mean, in our case, we know that our granddaughter, there was a letter that was sent to my son, because my son had written to their solicitor, and she was told what to say. And she says, I know that because she's told us. She said, I didn't know what to say, so I just said what I was told to say.
Yeah, and that's true in my case too, where, and I wasn't really told what to say because I never had the opportunity to ever see my dad or to say something to him or to even be mad at him. But I do know that I had to stop talking about him, because if I did, then I would get more of that, don't, this is who he is, that's who he was, those derogatory comments. And for me to not hear that, I had to stop talking about him.
I agree, and that's what children will do, and they will do it over all sorts of stuff, but they particularly do it over this family estrangement and alienation situation a lot. And we all want to have a peaceful life, and children learn very quickly that it's unpleasant if they start talking about us, so they don't. It doesn't mean to say they've forgotten us at all.
No, they don't.
Quite the reverse, actually. But they know that it's much better for them if they just keep stum.
Yeah, and I'm living proof that that's not true. But wouldn't it be a wonderful place that children didn't have to worry about whether or not they could see mom or dad or grandparents, that they could, thrive in their environment, that the worst thing that they had to worry about was, doing good at school and being successful and
being kind.
As we guide them into becoming a successful adult who has healthy relationships and a stable marriage and raising kids that move that forward, that I think is more important than, judges saying, give them, wait till they're 18.
Oh, I agree. No, I agree.
They won't have that. They will not have that thriving environment. I can guarantee that.
No, they won't. And it messes up relationships for them in later life as well. And so, the whole, it doesn't matter. That's what's so ridiculous about all of this, actually. Whichever way you look at it, it's not beneficial. So why do we even need to be talking about it? It's clear that these children are suffering, and adults are causing that suffering somehow. So I don't understand where the problem is. I don't understand why people can't acknowledge the damage that this does.
I have an opinion. I think the family law division of the state bars, I don't know if you have bars in your country, but here we have state bars. They license the family lawyers, the judges, and even some of the attorneys. They don't understand the damage that they're causing by saying these things. So they're not helping children thrive. No. They're just erasing a problem they don't want to see anymore. So it's easy for them to say, we're just going to do this. And I think that our biggest problem is them. They're the problem. And by because they're actually allowing a parent to be erased or the emotional cutoff, they're perpetuating that. They're creating the child's future at that point. That's when it starts. It starts at that moment. That's my opinion.
I absolutely agree with you. And it's not rocket science, is it, either?
No. And look at how many parents, how many grandparents. We're talking, globally. I have no idea what the number is. But
well, there was a study done in the UK at the end of last year that said 1 in 7 grandparents is denied contact with a grandchild. Now, we estimate there's 14 million grandparents in the UK. It's probably more than that, but that's the estimation of how many. Well, my maths isn't very good, but actually 1 in 7 means 2 million grandparents. And actually, if you assume that family has more than one grandchild, it could be huge. It's definitely.
Well, and then how many grandchildren do each of those grandparents have?
So it's enormous. Actually, I think it's a national and global disgrace.
I think it's an important thing you just brought up, and I've talked about it as far as, how the courts here look at parents, and I tell them, turn it around and look at the child. So when you're talking about that, and they're talking about grandparents, are missing out, if the courts and our leaders were to say, oh my goodness, look at the children and how many grandparents are they missing out on? Look at how many children there are.
it's a minimum of 2 million children, isn't it? So, you know, it's probably, it's 4 million plus children, I think, actually.
Yeah, if the average household had 2 children,
Exactly.
yeah,
Exactly. So
that's how,
if you said there were 4 million children suffering from neglect, there would be outcry.
absolutely.
But this is neglect. You know,
Yeah.
it's an emotional neglect. So I don't understand why somebody somewhere doesn't see it. I don't understand it at all.
No, and we do so many things for the children that are neglected or abused. We have things in place. I'm a guardian
Yeah,
ad litem here in the
sure.
States where
Yeah.
I advocate for the child. So I try to be their voice in making sure that they're safe. And we don't, in my case, I don't want to take a parent away from a child unless the parent just cannot
Mm.
rehabilitate or get their crap together so that they can actually be a good parent for their child and safe, a safe parent for their child. So
Sure.
very rarely would I want a child to be taken. There might be a pause where the parent needs to work through and learn new skills, because let's face it, many of us haven't learned enough of the skills that we need to be good parents today. There's
No.
a lot of that there. So we have all of this stuff in place to help children
Yeah.
that are abused, neglected. But what about the ones that are emotionally abused?
I agree.
Because you
And
can't see it, it doesn't exist.
I've had this disagreement with a very, I won't mention it, I won't name it, but a very large national charity here in the UK that protects children, but they will not acknowledge that it's emotional abuse. They just won't acknowledge it. And I don't understand, and nobody will give me an explanation of why either. So I don't know.
I don't understand that, because if you think about the emotional, physiological damage that's done, it's not a mental health issue. We're talking about the trauma brain. We're talking about the stunted growth of their development. We're talking about anxiety, depression. We're talking about early onset of, childhood sicknesses, or maybe early in adulthood. We're talking about maybe even early death because of that trauma. The trauma is sickening. It really makes children sick.
Yeah.
And they don't develop, they don't have that attachment where they lose trust. So their attachment kind of dissolves in a way. Like,
Yeah.
my attachment to my mom was kind of on and off,
Yeah.
but it's not as strong as it should have been. So
Yeah.
when people say that it's not a thing, they're saying it because they don't see it. And since they can't see it, it's not a thing.
That's right. That's right.
But the child learns how to love. They didn't learn how to hate.
No.
They
No.
didn't, they can witness someone hating, they can hear someone hating, but is hate something you see? It's, it's an action. But, to try and say that it's not a thing, they're avoiding.
And we've had, as you have too, I've no doubt, but we've had sort of many mental health studies done on our young people. And actually in the UK, our country has some of the most unhappy children. And I find that, well, appalling, to say the very least. And I cannot understand why family breakdown doesn't come into it. And I mean family breakdown in all its forms.
Yep.
As I touched on earlier on, really, because clearly it is a trauma for, I mean, my parents separated when I was 16, but it's a life-changing experience, and you never actually forget it.
Even on the best of terms.
But it has to be acknowledged as such, and it just, what I want to know is, why are people not really acknowledging it? Okay, there must be a very powerful lobbying group somewhere who disagrees with all of this. And I think I know probably where they're coming, who that group are. But I still don't understand why, when you're talking about happiness of children, it's a non-argument. Nobody, whoever they are, wants to see unhappy children. And if we can do something to prevent them being happy, then why on earth aren't we doing it?
So that's why we have a hard time understanding or getting on board with what they're thinking, because it seems like, okay, well, we're talking about the happiness of children. How can we be in a disagreement?
Mm. Well, it
Yeah,
speaks for itself rather, doesn't it?
it is. It's mind-boggling. I don't understand it.
No.
So you have a lot of great advice, and looking at the blog, you touch on a lot of different things here. You talk about Easter and this being an Easter holiday. And are you seeing a lot more people looking for support over this holiday? Is it harder on grandparents?
Yes, any celebration time of the year, so Christmas obviously and Easter, is always a bad time for grandparents because they associate those holiday times with being family times. If we take out the coronavirus issue, obviously at the moment, but under normal circumstances, it's always very difficult, Christmas and Easter. And yes, we get a lot more calls and emails during a holiday period.
Right. Yeah. So, and do you have a rather large support group that helps you with those phone calls or helps you talk to the grandparents that are calling in?
One of our trustees of the charity happens to be a GP, and so she supports me in that, because yes, it can be difficult. But I also have to say, after 12 and a half years, I am unshockable. There is nothing now that anybody could ever say to me, as far as relationships are concerned, that will ever shock me, because I've heard it all.
What an asset you are to parents and grandparents that are going through this right now, and having someone that really understand what they're going through, because you have
I'm just a mum and a wife and a grandmother,
but that's why it's important.
Had an experience, and I have a listening ear. That's all. And it's no greater than that. I mean, it really isn't. I facilitate meetings here, but actually the magic that happens comes from the people themselves.
Well, I find you inspiring, and I think I just commend you for what you've put together.
That's very honestly kind. But I thank you.
Thank you. I know. So some of the things on your blog, there's a variety here, really. So you talk about Easter, you talk about self-compassion. So and if I'm understanding what that is it's okay to have take care of yourself. It's okay to take that moment to make sure you're good, you're okay inside. Is
vital. It's very important, because I'm very aware of the enormous mental health issues that this causes grandparents, and that can manifest itself physically or mentally, actually. And they are desperate, and I've lost 3 grandparents through suicide.
Oh my goodness.
In 12 years, and that's always very difficult. So I know that I think as a grandparent, of my generation, it's different for every generation, presumably. I can only talk about me. But I think as a grandparent, you feel as though you ought to be able to make everything right. That's part of your role, if you like, to be able to heal wounds for people within your family unit. When you find you can't do that, it's really hard, it's really difficult, and you beat yourself up about it terribly. Mm-hmm. And grandparents who find themselves in this situation sink very low indeed. Some can't get out of bed in the morning. So the blogs I write about self-compassion really are to acknowledge that you're going to have terrible days where you feel awful, you feel life is not worth living, and you have to allow yourself a certain amount of time during the day to just, if you want to cry, then you sit and you cry, but actually you make sure you only do that for 10 minutes, whatever is right for you, and then you have to get up and you have to move on. And when I say the word move on, I don't mean move on and forget everything that's going on. You have to function. Yeah. Because the alternative is not a good one. Yeah.
You have to
And
be.
I don't ever want to have messages and phone calls and emails from other family members that I have done in the past. And so grandparents have to learn how to self-protect. And I think they find that very difficult to do. But it is incredibly important for their health, be it mental or physical. And it's hard to learn, if you're not used to doing self-protection or looking after yourself and being compassionate, and actually to be able to say, I was a good enough parent, I am a good enough grandparent. It's okay to be good enough. You don't have to be high flyer or anything like that. Good enough is all right.
Right.
But it's so important for people, because I know, because I'm on the receiving end of it, I know how awfully sad grandparents become.
Well, and this information is, I think it applies across the board in a lot of ways, especially when it comes to that self-care and self-compassion, because I think we all find ourselves in that position sometimes, and we have to address it, acknowledge it, but we have to keep living. So a lot of people find that, they find that they're guilty. They feel guilty because they should feel bad, but, they want to feel good. That's life telling you to live. And, that might be a painful spot, but you still need to keep living.
Yes, you do. And certainly that's evidenced when we have meetings as well, when a new grandparent comes who is traumatized, incredibly upset, tearful. But I will guarantee by the time that grandparent leaves our meeting, when they go down my garden path, they will be laughing. And that's all part of that. It's really important. I said to somebody the other day, you've got to give yourself permission to have fun.
Yeah. I like that. I like that you want to inspire them to laugh, but they come in traumatized and you're making them laugh, because I think laughter is definitely a healer. I think it helps us,
It is, and because some of the grandparents at that meeting have probably been with me from the very beginning. We know each other really well, and they are so good at supporting new grandparents. They're just brilliant at it, and they lighten that person's load, and that's what enables them to then have a laugh with us, that we can laugh. It's all right to have, and actually you'll feel so much better if you do.
Yeah.
And you can't have that feeling of guilt, because actually grandparents will often say, when they first contact us, they feel very ashamed that this has happened.
Like they failed somehow.
Yes, I think so. And I try to say to them, look, we can only be responsible for our own behavior. We can't be responsible for anybody else's behavior.
Right. Well, guilt is heavy, and laughter lightens that load a little bit. It doesn't get rid of the load. It just lightens it. It makes it bearable.
Yes, and if somebody feels better for 20 minutes, then that's good. So, hopefully the next meeting they come to, they might feel better for an hour. And that they have to be encouraged to see what's good in their lives, because however awful things are, there are still things that are good. But sometimes you need a bit of a prompt to be able to see what that is that's good. And it may be your husband or your wife. It could be other sons and daughters. It could be other grandchildren who you are still seeing. So they're waking up in the morning, they've got a roof over their head, they've got enough food in the fridge, and they've got water coming out of the tap. Well, that's something to be grateful for, all of us.
Sure.
Sure.
Yeah. Well, it's I just lost my train of thought on that. There was something that you had said that made me think that, oh yeah, you're teaching them through this, and without them even realizing, as they come and they listen and they are supported and wrapped around with, like, what it seems to me is like just wrapped in love at these meetings, and you're teaching them how to be okay. And they may not go home and still be okay, But with that repetition that you were talking about, each time their okay gets a little bit stronger. And
Yes.
eventually they'll be okay on their own, and
Yes.
or maybe be able to pay that forward and help someone else be okay.
Exactly. And that's that is precisely the whole point. And it isn't something that was contrived. It just happened by itself. And that, that's really by the people who are here, who are just so brilliant at it, really.
Well, that's the beauty of humanness and compassion, that
Mm.
empathy side, is that, people feel that. It's not necessarily words, it's our
No, no.
energy and
Yes, it is.
what we
And
share.
that, I think that's why the coronavirus is so difficult, because it is not enabling us to do this, just hold out a hand to somebody physically.
Right.
You can't do that at the moment. And actually that's so powerful, just holding out that hand to someone
Mhm.
in a meeting who is wobbly will stabilize that person. And it just makes a huge difference.
It is a challenge, and I'd like to say that it's temporary,
Mm.
but we have no idea how temporary, so it's kind of hard to put a time frame on that. But they've been challenged, and this is another challenge. Not that it makes it any easier or less challenging, but it will end. It will come to a point where we will get back in. And so, that part about being in a support group is you worry about the things that you can change. And that's part of, I think it's called the serenity prayer, where
Yeah.
you focus on what you can change and you don't focus on the things you can't. That
Yeah.
way you're putting all that energy into what you can do.
Yeah.
And you've given some great ideas for grandparents and anybody really listening to this to do, even the children. I love the challenge part that your grandchildren did.
Well, the Captain Underpants.
That is amazing. That is like the best idea so far. I love that.
And it's the simplicity of it, though, you see.
Oh my gosh, it's just really, it's a really clever way of keeping in touch with you. And I think you might
It's
share that.
lovely.
I'm
It's
going to
really
share
lovely.
that. Challenge them.
Yeah, definitely.
Oh my gosh, that's awesome. Well, just going through more of your blog, you have so much wealth of information out there. I really encourage anybody to go out there and read and learn a lot of this stuff. And do you is this something that you write, or do you invite other people to write?
I witter away, actually. It is me, but I actually want to encourage other people to write things for me to put in a blog as well. So if there's any budding writers out there who would like to write something and I will put it in a blog, that would be amazing. And then it stops me wittering away if somebody else does it, basically.
Yeah. I think you approached me last year to write one. I still owe you.
Yes, you do. I haven't forgotten.
I haven't even done my own because I've been, I have a full-time job, and I'm a full-time student, and I graduate at the end of this month.
Oh gosh.
So I get half of that time back, which I'm so looking forward to.
Yeah.
Maybe I can start working, because my webpage has been suffering for the last year. It's
Well, you can't do it all. As I say, it's okay to be good enough, remember.
Yeah. So right now I think I've been doing more with, being on here and talking to people and sharing my message. And so the end of this year, maybe I'll start working on the blog.
Marvelous. I'll hold you to it, mind.
Yeah, and and I have a OneNote that has ideas of what I need to blog, and so now I just need to start going down that list. And
that's fine. As long as I'm in that list somewhere, that would be marvelous.
I think about you all the time. I'm
always bless you.
trying to see how you're doing, and
Thank you.
It's important for grandparents, and I love the voice that you carry out for this and the support, and it's a great what do they call that? The example of what others can do. And
I think there's the most important thing for any grandparent that's watching this. It's so important that they remember the word hope, because hope is everything. And I spent 11 and a half years, I suppose, preaching to grandparents about they must never give up hope. And actually, secretly, I gave up hope of ever seeing our granddaughter. but it happened miraculously. And so if it can happen to us, it can happen to anybody at all. So grandparents must never, ever give up hope, and your grandchildren will never forget you, ever.
Mm-mm. They surely won't. They absolutely won't. So I think it would, and I'm not sure what we have in the States. I don't recall seeing groups like this for grandparents specifically. So I'm hoping that we can inspire grandparents to, create support groups. And it doesn't
That
have
would
to
be
be
great,
just
wouldn't it?
grandparents. It could be
Sure.
aunts and uncles and
Yeah.
cousins. They feel it too. And I know I met my cousins after my dad passed, and it was really a very satisfying feeling. So cousins are important too, because it does make you feel
Of
connected.
course it does. Of course it does.
Yeah, so I would like to see more and more of these support groups of all kinds going up, and just spreading that word and awareness, and
Absolutely.
helping each other. And
Well, if there's anybody out there who thinks it's a good idea to do, if they like to contact me, I'm very happy to talk to them and walk them through how to go about it and stuff. More than happy.
excellent. And I'll be sure to make sure they have the links to everything in the chat room, so that they can reach you. Is there anything else that you have that you want to say, or to the children, or to other parents or grandparents?
Oh, well, to all really. I mean, the big one is the one I've just said about never give up hope, and that applies to the children as well as the grandparents. And as far as there's any alienated grandchildren who might be listening to this, I can tell you 100% that your grandparents have never, ever stopped loving you, and they never will. And they are always there for you. You just need to be able to have the confidence to try and seek them out.
I love that. That's a beautiful message. I love that. All right. Well, I want to thank you so much for taking time out of your day and talking with me about this. I think it's a very important issue. And I think
It's been my pleasure.
I'm sorry?
It's been my pleasure.
Yes, I love it. So I will get get that information posted in the chat, and I hope we stay in touch. And if you ever want to do this again, please feel free. I would love to have you back and just continue this conversation. And maybe we could do a group one,
Maybe we could. Maybe we could. Yeah. I'm open to any ideas.
Yeah, let's think about that. That would be great.
Yeah.
Again, thank you for coming and just talking to me. I think, the talk is important, and that's why I'm doing this is, we got to start talking and sharing. So,
we do.
All right. Well, thank you for joining Mom Talk today, everybody. I hope you have a great evening and that you found some value out of this, and we will talk to you next week. Thank you. Bye-bye.